The rain in Seattle doesn't just fall, it clings. It's a persistent gray mist that seeps into your bones and stays there. It was a Tuesday, the kind of heavy afternoon that makes you want to lock the doors, brew a pot of coffee, and disappear into your work. I was sitting in my home office in Queen Anne, staring at a stack of spreadsheets that usually brought me peace. Numbers don't lie. They don't betray you. They don't have hidden agendas. Then, the first tremor of the earthquake that would ruin my life hit. Not a literal earthquake, a phone call. My brother Julian was the kind of guy who could sell a drowning man a glass of water and make him feel lucky to have it. He had this easy, in a breezy Pacific Northwest smile, and a way of making you feel like the most important person in the room right before he asked for a small favor. Growing up, our parents, Martha and Arthur, called him the adventurous one. I was the reliable one. In family speak, that means he spent every cent he ever touched on opportunities, and I worked 60-hour weeks at an accounting firm to build a life. Before we go deeper into this story, take a second and hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and let us know where you're watching from. I'm curious to know how far these stories travel. That afternoon, Julian didn't sound breezy. He sounded hunted. He told me he'd gotten into some bad luck with a real estate flip down in Tacoma. He claimed the contractor had skipped town with the deposits, and the private lenders were breathing down his neck. He needed $50,000 by Friday, or he was going to lose his house. He begged. He cried. He brought up our grandmother's dying wish that we'd always look out for each other. And because I'm the reliable brother, the one conditioned to be the safety net, I told him I'd see what I could do. I didn't know then that Julian wasn't drowning. He was standing on the shore, looking for someone to push into the deep end so he could use them as a stepping stone. 2 weeks passed after that phone call. I hadn't given him the cash yet. I told him I needed to see the underlying contracts and the lien notices first. I wanted to help, but I wasn't a fool, or so I thought. Julian stopped calling, and I figured he'd found another mark or managed to sweet-talk the lenders into an extension. I actually felt a sense of relief. Then came the knock. It wasn't the rhythmic, annoying tap Julian always used. This was heavy, official. It was 3 o'clock on a Wednesday. When I opened the door, I wasn't met by my brother. I was met by 2 men in charcoal suits who looked like they'd been carved out of granite. They didn't care about my spreadsheets or my quiet life. "Elias Thorne?" the taller one asked. His voice sounded like gravel being crushed. "Yes?" They didn't wait to be invited in. They stepped into my foyer, bringing the scent of wet wool and cold rain with them. They handed me a heavy manila envelope. Inside was a promissory note for $200,000, not the 50 Julian had mentioned. My signature was at the bottom of the last page. It was bold, clear, and utterly terrifying. It looked exactly like my handwriting. "We represent Sterling and Crane Holdings," the man said. "Your brother, Julian Thorne, listed you as the primary guarantor. He's defaulted on the last 2 interest payments, and since he's vacated his residence in Bellevue, we're here to discuss the accelerated payoff. $200,000 plus penalties, totaling $245,000. My stomach did a slow, sickening roll. My brother hadn't just lied about the amount. He'd committed a federal crime. He had used my credit, my social security number, and my clean reputation as collateral for a high-interest debt that had nothing to do with real estate. I was looking at financial ruin, or worse, a prison cell if the authorities thought I was a co-conspirator in a fraud scheme. I tried calling Julian the second those men left. Straight to voicemail. I called my parents. My mother answered, her voice trembling. She told me Julian had called them, saying he was going on a spiritual retreat to clear his head, and that he'd be off the grid for a month. He'd even convinced them to give him $5,000 for travel expenses. I didn't wait. I drove across the bridge to Bellevue to the upscale apartment Julian always bragged about. The door was unlocked. When I walked in, the air felt stale. It was empty. Not just moved out empty, but fled in the dark empty. There were piles of junk mail on the counter, mostly final notices from credit card companies. When the only thing left in the living room was a single frame photograph lying face down on the hardwood floor. I picked it up. It was a picture of us when we were kids, fishing at Lake Chelan during a family vacation. Julian had stepped on it on his way out. The glass was shattered into a spiderweb pattern centered right over my face. The weight of the betrayal finally hit me. This wasn't a desperate mistake made by a brother in trouble. This was a calculated sacrifice. Julian knew that if he ran, the lenders, who clearly weren't the type to go to small claims court, would come for the person with the reliable reputation in the home equity. He was banking on me being too proud or too scared to go to the police and turn in my own blood. He wanted me to be his human shield. I sat on that cold floor in his empty apartment and realized that the brother I grew up with, the one I'd shared a bunk bed with, was dead. In his place was a predator who viewed me as prey. If I didn't move fast, the enforcement guys from Sterling and Crane would be the least of my worries. The bank would freeze my accounts and the DA would be looking at me for bank fraud. I couldn't go to the Seattle PD just yet. Julian was smart. He'd spent years mimicking my signature on birthday cards and documents. He'd likely forged the digital keys I used for my accounting business. Without a confession, it would be my word against a mountain of forged evidence. I needed a confession. I needed Julian to admit in his own arrogant voice that he had framed me. But Julian was in the wind. He wouldn't answer my texts. He wouldn't talk to a lawyer. Hollywood, I had to play a different game. I needed to dangle the one thing Julian could never turn down, the promise of a bigger score. Before we continue, take a second and share your thoughts so far on this story below. I read every single one. If you were in my shoes facing a brother who shattered your life like that glass, would you still try to protect him, or would you go for the jugular? I reached out to an old contact from my days auditing tech firms, a woman named Sarah who had transitioned into high-end corporate security. She introduced me to a man known simply as Marcus. Marcus wasn't your typical PI with a trench coat and a Nikon. He was a social engineer. He specialized in finding people who didn't want to be found and convincing them to walk right into a trap. Marcus tracked Julian within 48 hours. My brother hadn't gone on a spiritual retreat. He was holed up in a mid-range rental house in Portland, Oregon, using a burner phone and likely looking for his next mark to fund his lifestyle. He was laying low, but predators like Julian can't stay quiet for long. They need the rush of the con. We created a whale. We invented a fictional venture capitalist named Mr. Sterling, a cheeky nod to the guys chasing me, who was looking to offshore some gray market capital into distressed Pacific Northwest real estate. We needed someone who looked like a high roller but moved like a ghost. I funded the sting. It cost me nearly $15,000 to set up the office, the rentals, and Marcus's wardrobe. It was the last of my liquid savings, but I knew if this didn't work, I'd be losing everything anyway. Marcus, he's dressed in a bespoke suit that screamed old money, started frequenting the high-end hotel bars in Portland where Julian was spotted. He played it perfectly. He didn't approach Julian. He let Julian approach him. Within 3 days, Julian, starved for the spotlight and short on cash, was sitting across from Marcus at the Nines Hotel bar, pitching himself as a fixer who knew how to move money through secure family channels. He didn't know the hotel suite Marcus had rented was wired with 3 high-definition hidden cameras. He didn't know the investor was on my payroll, and he didn't know that I was sitting in a nondescript Ford Transit van parked 3 blocks away, wearing a headset and listening to his every word. Listening to Julian talk to Marcus was like watching a masterclass in manipulation. His voice was smooth, and his laughter practiced. He told Marcus that he had extensive experience in managing large-scale assets and that he'd recently secured $250,000 in bridge financing for a major project. "How'd you manage that?" Marcus asked, swirling a glass of 20-year-old scotch. "Most guys are struggling to get a line of credit in this economy." Julian laughed, that same breezy, arrogant laugh that used to make me feel proud to be his brother. "You just have to know which doors to unlock. I have a partner, a very reliable partner back in Seattle. He's got the credit and I've got the vision. He doesn't even know he's my biggest investor yet." I gripped the edge of my seat in the van. My knuckles were white. The betrayal was no longer a theory, it was a recording. He was bragging about it. And he was treating my life like a joke he'd told 100 times. "A partner who doesn't know?" Marcus pressed, leaning in with a mock grin. That sounds like a liability, Julian. If he finds out, he could pull the plug. My clients don't like liabilities. Julian leaned in, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. He won't find out until I'm halfway to Cabo. I've been routing the digital footprints through his own business servers. Even if he goes to the cops, he'll look like the one who cooked the books. I've spent months setting it up. He's my brother. He trusts me. And that trust is going to buy me a very nice life on a beach where extradition is just a word people can't spell. Before we go deeper, I would love to hear your point of view. Tell me what part hits you the hardest in my story. The fact that he used his own brother's business servers to hide his tracks, or that he was already planning his escape while I was being threatened. Share your thoughts in the comments. Sitting in that surveillance van, the air felt thin. Every time Julian laughed through my headset, it felt like a physical blow to my chest. It wasn't just the money, it was the sheer effort he had put into destroying me. He hadn't just stumbled into a bad situation, he had spent months laying a digital trail that led straight to my front door. Marcus, playing the role of the shadowy investor, Mr. Sterling, to perfection, leaned back in his leather chair in the hotel suite. "So, Julian," Marcus said, his voice smooth as silk, "you're telling me that if my capital moves through your brother's accounting firm, the IRS won't see a thing? That's a bold claim. Most CPAs are paranoid by nature." Julian swirled his bourbon, the ice clinking against the glass, a sound I'll never forget. Elias isn't just paranoid, he's predictable. That's his weakness. He logs in at 8 a.m., he logs off at 6 p.m. He uses the same 3 passwords for everything. I installed a keylogger on his home office computer last Thanksgiving while he was carving the turkey. I have every client list, every encrypted folder, and every digital signature he's ever created. I closed my eyes. Last Thanksgiving, I had let him stay in my guest room. I had cooked him dinner. I had hugged him and told him I was proud of how he was turning his life around. All while he was sitting in my office, stealing the keys to my kingdom. "And the lenders?" Marcus asked. "Sterling and Crane? They don't seem like the type to wait for a trial." Julian chuckled. "They're my insurance. If Elias starts poking around or tries to go to the feds, I just drop a hint to the collectors that he's hiding the money in a private vault. They'll put the squeeze on him, and he'll be too busy defending his life to worry about what I'm doing in Costa Rica. It's a perfect closed loop." I signaled Marcus through his hidden earpiece. "Get him to admit the specific forged documents." Marcus nodded almost imperceptibly. "I need to see proof of concept, Julian. I'm not moving $5 million on a trust me. Show me a document you've already cleared. Something with his signature that he doesn't know exists." Julian didn't even hesitate, but he pulled a slim laptop from his bag. A laptop I recognized. It was my old MacBook, the one he claimed he'd lost a year ago. He opened a file and turned the screen toward Marcus. "This is a power of attorney. It gives me full access to his secondary business account in Oregon. He doesn't check that account often. It's mostly for his passive consulting fees. I've already moved $60,000 through it. Look at the signature. Can you tell the difference?" Marcus leaned in, pretending to study the screen. "Flawless. You're a regular Da Vinci, Julian." "I'm a realist," Julian corrected. "Family is just a biological accident. Why should he have the house, the car, and the retirement fund just because he's reliable? I'm the one with the ideas. I'm just taking my inheritance early." Hearing him justify it, hearing him call our brotherhood a biological accident, was the moment the last thread of my hesitation snapped. I had been worried about our parents. I had been worried about the Thorne family name. But Julian had already set the name on fire. I was just the one holding the extinguisher, deciding whether or not to let it burn. We had enough. We had the confession, the admission of the keylogger, and the visual proof of the forged power of attorney. But Marcus wanted more. He knew that in a U.S. court, especially with the strict rules in Washington and Oregon regarding recording, we needed the confession to be as undeniable as possible. "One last thing," Marcus said, standing up and walking toward the window overlooking the Portland skyline. My associates need to know that Elias won't flip if he gets arrested. How do you know he won't cut a deal with the DA to give you up?" Julian stood up too, his confidence peaking. He was drunk on the prospect of the $5 million investment. Because I've already planted the evidence of his gambling debt. I created fake accounts in his name on 3 different offshore betting sites. I've been making small losses and big transfers for months. If he goes to the cops, they'll just see a desperate accountant who gambled away his client's money and tried to blame his adventurous brother. No one believes the boring guy when the math says he's a thief. It was a masterpiece of malice. He hadn't just stolen my money, he had stolen my character. He had written a script where I was the villain and he was the victim. I think I've heard enough, Marcus said. But he wasn't looking at Julian anymore. He was looking at the small camera hidden in the smoke detector. Did you get all that, Elias? The color drained from Julian's face so fast I thought he might faint. He spun around looking at the walls, the lamps, the ceiling. Who are you talking to? I didn't wait for Marcus to answer. I stepped out of the van and walked into the hotel lobby. My heart was thumping against my ribs like a trapped bird. I took the elevator to the penthouse floor. Every floor the numbers ticked up felt like a year of my life I was taking back. When the doors opened, I walked straight to Suite 402. I didn't knock. I used the key card Marcus had left for me. I walked in, and for the first time in 3 weeks, I looked my brother in the eye. He was standing by the minibar, his hand trembling as he held his glass. The golden boy looked small. He looked like a cornered rat in a $3,000 suit. Elias, he whispered, what are you? How did you get here? I didn't say anything at first. I just walked over to the laptop, my laptop, and shut the lid. The spiritual retreat was a nice touch, Julian, but you always did have a flair for the dramatic. Before we continue, take a second and share your thoughts so far on this story below. I read every single one. If you were Elias, standing in that room with the man who tried to frame you for a federal crime, what would be the first thing you'd say? Julian tried to pivot. It was his default setting. He forced a laugh, though it sounded jagged. Oh man, you got me. This was a prank, right? Shoo, I was just playing a character for this guy. I was going to tell you. I was trying to see if I could get this guy to invest so I could pay back Sterling and Crane for you. The lie was so pathetic it made me want to vomit. Stop, I said. The word was quiet, but it cut through his rambling like a knife. I've been in the van, Julian. I heard it all. The keylogger, the offshore betting accounts, the biological accident. I heard how you were going to let me go to prison while you sat on a beach in Cabo. Julian's eyes darted to Marcus, who was now calmly deconstructing the hidden microphones. You're a cop? Julian stammered. I'm a private investigator, Marcus said without looking up. But more importantly, I'm an employee of Family Secrets and Revenge. And everything you just said is currently being uploaded to a secure cloud server with 3 different backups. Julian turned back to me, his face twisting into something ugly. The mask of the golden boy finally fell away, revealing the rot underneath. So what? You have a video. Big deal. You think the cops are going to care? You think mom and dad are going to let you put me in jail? If you turn this in, you destroy the family. You'll be the one who broke mom's heart. Is that what you want, Elias? To be the son who destroyed everything? It was his final weapon, guilt. He had used it his whole life to get me to finish his homework, to cover his debts, to lie to our parents. But the guilt didn't work anymore. The fire he'd started had burned that away too. The family's already destroyed, Julian, I said, my voice steadier than I ever thought possible. You destroyed it when you signed my name to a $250,000 debt. You destroyed it when you decided my freedom was worth less than your next vacation. I pulled a stack of photos from my pocket, the ones Marcus had taken of Julian at the rental house in Portland, meeting with other known associates of the Sterling and Crane Group. I'm not here to argue with you, I continued. I'm here to give you a choice. There are 2 people waiting in the lobby. One is a detective from the Financial Crimes Unit. The other is a representative from Sterling and Crane. They're very interested to know that you haven't actually lost their money in a real estate flip, but that you've been funneling it into crypto accounts. Julian's breath hitched. So the mention of the lenders scared him far more than the police. The police had rules. Sterling and Crane didn't. What do you want? He hissed. I want a signed, notarized confession of every forgery, every unauthorized access, and every penny you've stolen, I said. And then, I want you to go to the police station with me and turn yourself in for the fraud. If you do that, I'll tell Sterling and Crane that you've cooperated and that the money is being recovered. If you don't, I'll walk out that door and I'll give them your GPS coordinates. Before we go deeper, I would love to hear your point of view. Tell me what part hits you the hardest in my story. The moment Elias gave him the ultimatum, or Julian's attempt to use their mother as a shield. Share your thoughts in the comments. The silence in the hotel suite was heavy, broken only by the hum of the air conditioning and the distant sound of Portland traffic below. Julian looked at the two options I'd laid out on the mahogany table like a death sentence. He wasn't the golden boy anymore. He was a man who had run out of road. His eyes darted toward the door, then back to the recording equipment Marcus was packing away. He was looking for a gap, a lie, a way to spin this. But for the first time in 30 years, I didn't give him one. "You really think you can do this?" Julian hissed, his voice cracking. "You think you can just hand over your own brother to the feds? Think about Mom, Elias. Think about her heart. You know she's had those spells. You tell the cops and you're the one who puts her in the hospital. Can you live with that?" I didn't flinch. I'd spent my whole life being the shock absorber for his bad decisions, protecting our parents from the truth while Julian drained their savings and my sanity. I leaned in, my shadow falling over him. "Mom's heart is already breaking, Julian. She just doesn't know who broke it yet. I'm not the one who signed my name to a $250,000 debt. I'm not the one who installed a keylogger on her reliable son's computer. You did that. You're the one who pulled the trigger. I'm just the one calling the paramedics." Marcus pulled a pre-drafted affidavit from his briefcase. It was a cold clinical document that detailed every single unauthorized access, every forged signature, and every penny Julian had rerouted through my business accounts. It was the truth, stripped of Julian's adventurous framing. "Sign it," I said. Julian's hand shook as he reached for the pen. He looked at the document, his eyes scanning the paragraphs that essentially signed away his freedom. He looked at me, a flicker of the old manipulative Julian returning for one last attempt. "Elias, please, we can fix this. I have a lead on a crypto mining op in Vancouver. Give me 60 days, I'll double the money. I'll pay back Sterling and Crane, and you'll never see me again. I'll disappear. Just don't make me sign this." "The private investigator I hired didn't just record you, Julian," I said, my voice cold. "He's been tracing the blockchain. We know the crypto you stole is already gone. You gambled it on high-leverage trades and lost it all 48 hours ago. There is no Vancouver. There is no double your money. Just there is only this paper." The last bit of air seemed to leave Julian's lungs. He realized I wasn't guessing. I knew everything. He slumped into the chair, the weight of his own hubris finally crushing him. He signed the document. The pen scratched against the paper, the only sound in the room. And with that one stroke, the golden boy became a felon. The drive to the Portland Police Bureau was the longest 30 minutes of my life. Julian sat in the back of my SUV, staring out the window at the rain-slicked streets. He didn't say a word. Marcus followed in his own car, carrying the physical copies of the recordings and the signed affidavit. When we walked into the precinct, the atmosphere was stark. Fluorescent lights, the smell of burnt coffee, and the weary eyes of officers who had seen every version of betrayal the city had to offer. I handed the packet to the desk sergeant. "My name is Elias Thorne," I said, my voice steady for the first time in weeks. "I'm here to report a multi-state financial fraud and identity theft. This is the suspect, Julian Thorne, and this is the evidence." As the detectives led Julian away into an interview room, he turned back to look at me. There was no apology in his eyes. There was only resentment. He looked at me like I was the traitor. It was a look that told me he would never change. He would spend his time in prison figuring out how to blame me for his sentence. 2 days later, I drove back to Seattle. The enforcement guys from Sterling and Crane had been informed by their legal counsel that Julian was in custody and that a full forensic audit was underway. Because of the evidence I provided, and they had no choice but to drop the claim against me. My home was safe. My career was on life support. but it wasn't dead. But then came the hardest part, the family dinner. I sat at my parents' dining table in their quiet suburban home. My mother had made pot roast. My father was complaining about the local news. They still thought Julian was on a retreat. When I told them the truth, the silence that followed was more deafening than the screaming at the hotel. "You put your brother in jail?" my father whispered, his fork hitting the china with a sharp clink. "Over money, Elias? We could have figured it out. We could have taken a second mortgage." "It wasn't over money, Dad," I said, the frustration finally boiling over. "It was over my life. He was going to let me go to prison. He was going to let them take this house from you to pay his debts. He didn't care about you. He didn't care about me. He only cared about the next con." My mother began to cry, not for me, but for Julian. She couldn't see the predator. She could only see the little boy who used to catch fireflies in the backyard. It was then I realized that the reliable son is always expected to set himself on fire to keep the troubled sun warm. Before we continue, take a second and share your thoughts so far on this story below. I read every single one. Have you ever been the responsible one in a family where the troublemaker gets all the sympathy? How did you handle the guilt? The months that followed were a blur of depositions, legal fees, and cold shoulders at family gatherings. The DA in Oregon moved forward with the charges. Julian's defense tried to paint me as the manipulative one, claiming I'd coerced the confession. But the video from Family Secrets and Revenge was undeniable. The jury saw the golden boy laughing about his biological accident of a brother, and the verdict was swift. Julian was sentenced to 4 years in a minimum security facility for grand larceny and aggravated identity theft. My parents stopped calling me. My mother sent a letter saying she forgave me but couldn't look at me without seeing the son she lost. It hurt. It hurt in a way that the financial ruin never could. But every morning I woke up in my own bed, in my own house, with my own name. I started a new firm. I moved out of the old office that reminded me of Julian's shadow. I rebuilt my reputation one client at a time, being more transparent than ever. And I learned that trust isn't something you give because of blood. It's something you earn through consistency. I'm standing on the balcony of my new apartment now, looking out over the Puget Sound. The rain is still falling, but it doesn't feel heavy anymore. It feels like a cleansing. Julian called me once from prison. He wanted me to put money on his commissary. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't apologize for the keylogger or the forgery. He just said, "You owe me, Elias. I'm in here because of you." I didn't argue. I didn't get angry. I just said, "No, Julian, you're in there because of you, and I'm out here because of me." I hung up the phone and blocked the number. The golden boy is gone. The reliable brother is gone. There is only Elias Thorne. I've learned that family isn't a suicide pact. You don't have to go down with the ship just because someone you love is the one who poked the holes in the hull. You are allowed to survive. You are allowed to be happy, even if the person who tried to ruin you is miserable. Thank you so much for sticking with me through this journey on Family Secrets and Revenge. This story was one of the hardest I've ever had to share, but it was a necessary one. If this story touched you or reminded you of a situation in your own life, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more stories of justice and truth, and share this video with someone who might be struggling with a toxic family dynamic. What would you have done in my shoes? Would you have let your brother ruin you to keep the peace? Or would you have stood up for your own life? I'll be in the comments reading every single one of your thoughts. Your support means the world to us. Until next time, stay safe and keep seeking the truth.